Nobody could even get close to this dog. Some people try and treat, some people try and other methods, and nothing was working for this dog. So I knew I had to get my hands on this dog, or to just handle the leash
Yeah.
in order that way, so the client could say, "Hey, something's working here,"
Right.
because he actually said those magic words, "You're my last hope."
So I got the opportunity to sit down with Michael Shikashio. Aside from him being one of the chillest and most down-to-earth people I've ever met in dogs, his insight and gentle way of delivering important information is mwah. Of course, we talked about aggression, but we also talked about the beauty of street dogs, adapting methods when the go-to method ain't going, and the importance of human-to-dog relationships when dealing with aggressive behavior. This one is good. I hope you enjoy it. I like to ask people to make sure that what I'm saying is correct about you, right? So you're an internationally recognized expert in dog aggression. Correct, right?
You say so?
Right. You present at conferences and universities all around the world. Correct,
Yeah.
right? You have all the letters that the International Association of Animal and Behavior Consultants has to offer.
Technically, no.
Okay.
I'm certified dog behavior because they do other species too. They have
Got it.
parrots and all that. So
okay,
yeah.
but for canine, you got all the initials and letters and stuff. Yeah. All right. Okay. Cool. And then you're the host of the podcast, The Biting End of the Dog.
Yep.
Right. And you own aggressivedogs.com.
Yep.
Right.
Dog without the
aggressive dog, sorry,
Yep.
.com, which is basically an online solution to help dog owners and trainers better understand and treat aggression.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything?
No, that sounds great.
All right, cool. So, again, like I did off camera, I just want to thank you for even coming out. Especially, you don't know me from Adam, and then you're just like, yeah, like I'll come out and talk to you, in your barn in Scappoose. So I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah.
I noticed a few Dobermans and stuff in your videos. Can you tell me like when you first kind of fell in love with the breed, or did you fall in love with the breed, or was it just one dog, or
It was one dog because I was actually fostering labs at the time.
Oh, okay.
A lot of labs and field bred labs and stuff like that. But then they sometimes got other breeds into there. So I actually fostered him first, but I was what they, foster win. I guess they used to call it foster fail when you adopt the dog. But he was just the sweetest, like Doberman, like kind of broken, like in a way, like meaning like he wasn't all there. He was a little slow. You'd ask him to sit, and like 5 minutes later, he's like, oh, and like we're done, like that kind of action. Like, Well, he was, he got me loving the breed. So then I did a lot more fostering of Dobermans, and then I ended up getting my second Doberman, which is Kenji. He passed away a few years ago, but totally different. He was crisp, fast,
smarter.
You can tell why he didn't last in somebody's home. I don't think actually he was in somebody's home. He was probably like backyard dog or something like that, because he wasn't house trained. Shoot everything up like typical stuff, but he's still a sweet dog. So yeah, that's
And do you have a breed that you really like now, or?
I've been eyeing golden retrievers, small dogs. I just think they're, when you see them, they're always just so happy. So like at this stage of my life, I'm like, that's what we should strive to be. It's like a golden. It's just not all of them, but a lot of them, they just have that look of life is good.
I totally relate to that. Like I'm a big doodle fan. I know there's a lot of trainers out there that do not like doodles, but I like doodles for the same reason. They're like simple, they're happy, and like why, why go for anything?
So who knows?
Super difficult.
Maybe a half golden, half Dobie.
That would be interesting. That would be interesting. A fluffy Doberman. Yeah. Aggression is a topic that often sparks curiosity and concern among the average dog owner. Can you tell us what the term aggression means to you?
So it's a question I get a lot, and people ask me, like, how do I define aggression? What's your definition of aggression? And so I don't actually label dogs aggressive or call what they're doing aggressive, because that's putting a label on the dog, sort of like giving somebody a personality trait. Then they're kind of stuck with it. So even though my business name is aggressivedog.com, it's just what people search for. But I like to look at it as the behaviors of the dog. So aggressive behaviors. And in that context, I talk about, the definition of aggression for me is an aggressive behavior is the function of it is to increase distance from or eliminate a threatening stimulus. So something the dog is just concerned about, threatening themselves, their resources, their people, their property. And their goal is to try to make that thing go away by either getting distance from it or making the thing get distance or eliminating it completely. So very simple definition, which most people can wrap their head around. Because you'll see different definitions. You hear like the intent to do harm, but it's not always intent to do harm. The dog sometimes might bark at somebody. They don't want to hurt them. They just want them to go away. And if that function works, like that satisfies that function of creating distance, it works. So it's behavior just with that in mind. So it's
I really
uncomplicates it.
I really like that definition too, because I mean, one of the things that I've always said is that generally when dogs exhibit aggression, they just want distance. They just want space from whatever it is. Pretty good. It's pretty good. Pretty good. I see why you go everywhere. In a podcast, you mentioned that you like to travel, and one of the things that you like to do was observe streeties, right?
Yeah.
Which basically a dog that's free to roam the streets. Can you tell us about one of the times that you were observing streeties and something stuck?
Ooh, that's a good question. I like that one. I think for me, it was just realizing how much freedom of movement and choices plays a role in dogs' behavior and their development. You see it. So it wasn't any one. Well, I could say that I really, when I was in Chile, sort of the southern side of Chile, we were staying in this really beautiful like lakefront town. So kind of a smaller town, beautiful lake with a big volcano in the middle of it. Just gorgeous area of Chile. And this town, maybe like 5, 6 restaurants, one hotel, that kind of size town. And there's a lot of dogs. And one of them just struck me as like, this dog is living the life because he was hanging out. You could see him hanging out in front of the restaurant, and some tourists coming in and out. And he knew exactly who was going to be good, who was not. Like so good at observing the people, but also the dogs too. Like the interactions with the other dogs. He'd see dogs owned by people on leash walking by, or other off-leash dogs, and the interactions were just exquisite. Like in terms of communication, very subtle, where dogs here have to make a lot of noise to get their point across. Sometimes just the little subtleties and the looks and the communication and the behaviors, how they interact with people. That dog really struck me as like, wow, this is like, because people feel bad about street dogs.
Right.
Like, oh no, this poor dog. And like, this dog is living a life. Think about it. I mean, complete freedom to do whatever he wants and getting well fed. Who knows about the veterinary care, but other than that, I mean, knows how to avoid cars. I mean, just so that's what struck me with all of these, observing these dogs is, freedom of movement and choice and control of the environment is the best thing we can do for their, all these behavior problems that we see, aggression, separation anxiety, destructive behaviors. You don't see it with those dogs. Why? Because they have full autonomy in their lives to do whatever they want, just like people. Right.
Yeah,
the more we're restricted, the more frustrated we get. So,
that's true.
Yeah.
Sure. In your travels, do you think that there are certain places where you see more like aggression issues or separation anxiety issues, like in certain countries?
Definitely. I think the more urban the environment, the more issues you're going to see because of the restriction of movements typically. And although some of those dogs can get well adjusted because they are dogs, dogs are amazingly adaptable, but some of them are taken from environments like, imagine taking that street dog from Chile and flying it up to New York City. Forget it.
You mean like they do?
LA all the time.
They go to Mexico. Like, oh,
yeah. Like I don't know how it is on the West Coast here, but you see like more influx of meat trade dogs from like Korea, and it's just those dogs, they've never even touched grass. They don't. It's like you're actually gonna have an easier time like getting a coyote or raccoon and socializing it because at least they've experienced more, right? You're gonna have an easier time getting that animal social than you're gonna with that particular meat trade dog, just because they don't have any of that experience. So it's definitely in environments where there's more restrictions on the dogs, and it's universal everywhere I travel. Like it's the more restrictive the environment and the laws and just cultural norms of how restricted the dogs are, the more behavior problems. So it's why the U.S. is so heavily impacted with behavior issues, and UK as well, like London area. And then if you go to countries like France, where it's a little bit more open, like you see the dogs at cafes or like they're allowed in restaurants, you don't see as many problems. So, and when I tell stories about like some of the cases I have with really bad bite cases, in a place that's like in a Nordic country, forget it. They're like, well, why would this, it's like having a pet bear in your home. It's like, like why would you do that to yourself? But it's normal for a lot of people here. It's normalized.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. I was wondering because I feel like one, like when I grew up, one, I didn't really know that many people with dogs, right? And some of that might have been cultural, but I think also there were just less dogs in people's homes, like,
Yeah.
30
Mhm.
years ago.
Yeah.
And even from the time that I was in LA, moving here, like I just feel like there's been an influx in popularity of just owning a dog.
Mhm.
And from that, just seeing like a lot of people who have these different ideas of like what it's like to live with a dog, and like you said, putting like these restrictions
Mhm.
on dogs and
Yeah.
dog ownership. And so as a result, like all of these behavioral things are popping up. And then also the way that people, I think, are socializing dogs, where
Yeah.
they have this like idea that they should all be friends, right?
Right.
And they don't get the option of being selective with who they want to be around the same way that we're selective about who
Exactly.
we want to be around. And so it's
Exactly.
like fostering, it seems like a lot of behavioral issues, which is good. It keeps dog trainers in business, but but at the same
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
it's not ideal for the dogs.
Yeah. Yeah. Like cultural and societal norms or can really influence the dog's behavior.
Yeah.
Because there's that saying that the behavior is in the environment, and it's can't be more true with some of what these pet guardians are doing. They're going on, they're taking their small dog, dressing it up, putting it in a stroller, covering the stroller, walking around town. I mean, it's not natural, at least for now, for those
Yeah.
dogs to
Yeah.
experience that. So that's where you get the behavior problems start to surface because the dog never experiences how to navigate things like that street dog. The street dog knows it goes near that other dog's bone, it's going to get a look and it's going to learn one way or another, usually very subtly. But this dog's stuck in a stroller getting pushed down streets in LA is not going to really learn those nuances. And if it does, it's going to speak loudly, right?
Yeah.
Because that's all it's really maybe knows.
This is like random, but I'm thinking about, so my wife and I went to Japan, I want to say like maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. And we went to one of like the pet stores, and like they had all these like young puppies. And one of the things that we noticed about like pretty much all the puppies in there is that they were very docile,
Mm.
like very docile for puppies. And we were like, are they breeding for this? Like, are they like
Yeah.
picking puppies that are this way? And so I know we've done so much selective breeding
Mhm.
in the past because we wanted dogs to hunt, birds, or
Yeah.
we wanted dogs to like be guardians or whatever. So I'm wondering if we're going to start doing more selective, or if you think, or if maybe you've even seen this, like more selective breeding as far as like making pet dogs that are more docile, are more compliant,
Yes,
are just like,
there actually are people looking at doing that now. There's both some dogs that is she's a trainer, but also was selecting for just pet dogs. Not worried about what the dog looks like,
oh,
worrying about health, but also looking at behavior, like really selecting the most appropriate dogs for a pet home, without thinking about, the dog needs to herd this or hunt that or all the other things that we've selected for many generations and many of the breeds we have.
yeah, I hope she's
So,
including cute in there, because that's
yeah, I met one of the dogs, and I gotta tell you, this dog, I was like, I want to take that dog home. It was just obviously the behavior was there, but the look, it
Yeah.
was kind of like a cross, like Sheltie, Australian Shepherd, Border Collie sort of mix
Nice.
with the
Yeah.
really cool colors. It was just
Yeah.
kind of like
That's
it's got the
cool.
look too.
Yeah, that's cool, man.
Yeah.
I think that would be good for people and good for dogs, especially because, again, I think the things what we expect of them a lot of times is not always fair and not always true to their nature.
Right.
I like, one of the things I always tell people as soon as they come in here is that like most people who hire dog trainers don't like dogs. And then people go like, look at me like I have, like 5 heads. And I'm like, well, dogs dig, they pee and poop wherever they want, they pull on leashes, they jump, they bite, they scratch, they destroy things. I was like, people like pets. They want a dog that comes when they call it,
Good
sits
point.
politely for petting,
I like
goes
that.
to its bed when you tell it to, walks on a loose leash. I'm like, those are things that you have to teach it. And that's a job generally for most
Yeah.
dogs, So, you know, if that's what you want, you got to prepare your dog for that job.
Exactly.
But having dogs that are bred that are just a little bit more compliant, a little more even keel, you know, I think that would probably be good for society and good for those dogs.
I hope, yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope the talk about genetics and breeding keeps going on and makes it mainstream, because it definitely needs to be talked about more, because people are ending up, as you know,
Yeah.
with the wrong type of dog for their lifestyle.
Yeah,
And then
100%.
they're looking at the looks first,
Mhm.
you know, or the accessory of it, without, you know, really considering that
Yeah,
they've
like,
got a sentient being with genetics involved, you know,
oh,
in
my
their home.
beagle just sniffs, you
Yeah.
know, on
I
all
need
these
him to
walks
stop
that are,
sniffing.
yeah.
I need my Sheltie to stop barking.
It's like, okay, all right, good luck. What personal experiences have helped shape your approach to working with aggressive dogs?
Personal experiences that have shaped how I work with aggressive dogs. That's a big question. I like it though. Um, I think it came from a lot of the foster and rescue work I did early on. And I wasn't even a dog trainer yet at the time. Like, this is going back 25 years ago, when I was kind of just fostering some dogs, and I was working on a totally different job. But one of the issues I started to see, of course, is when you're volunteering for multiple rescues, they start to send you more and more difficult dogs, because you're getting known as like the foster that can handle all these dogs. But a lot of these dogs also ended up getting returned, or you get them, they would get adopted out, and some behavior, the aggression or something would surface. So I thought, what better way for me to help these dogs than to learn about how to work with that particular issue, especially if it's aggression or other behavior problems. So that's probably what was the catalyst for me studying more and learning more about training. And, you know, so I took a deep dive into all training, but really just also focusing on aggression, which is kind of the wrong order when you think about it. Usually you start training, learn teaching the typical, like,
Yeah.
walking on a loose leash, which I learned that, but then I was also at the same time really interested in the aggression stuff. So I kind of, you know, it was definitely just seeing these dogs, you know, being given up on because of something that's usually at least manageable and modifiable, you
And
know.
sometimes misunderstood. I would
Exactly.
assume.
Yeah. So yeah, so it wasn't any one particular moment. I don't think it was
Okay.
just the cumulative, seeing that over and over. And now just, you know, of course, the work we do,
Yep.
we see it all the time.
Yep.
And you know, it really motivates you to try to, if you want to help the dogs, you know, one of the number one reasons they get given up on is because of behavior. So what better way to help them?
And just to piggyback on that, because I know in the past, like when I've worked with rescues, we'll do a lot of work on a dog. You know, a dog could come in for a very long program. We make a lot of progress.
Yeah.
And then we end up having to do, like, part of what we do in our business with the board and trains is that we want to do a bunch of follow-up lessons with whoever's going to be responsible for the dog, so that they can kind of continue practicing the work that we did, right? And I found that with the rescues, if they didn't have a foster lined up, and even sometimes if they did, you know, we wouldn't be able to schedule with those people, or get the people to kind of practice the things that we were working on with the dog before they were able to find the dog a home. And I was wondering if you ever experienced that, and if there were ways that you combated that at all, to kind of make sure that what you had worked on was continuing to get.
I've found when I first started out, you're always kind of thinking handler-dog relationship and what that handler's doing to teach the dog. Of course, we're teaching the dog, but also when we're in those moments where we need to see certain behaviors that we've trained happen. You know, let's just use an example like Uncle Bob coming over, and the dog's maybe got issues with strangers, and so we work with the dog and we teach alternative behaviors, station, sit, whatever, and then maybe counter condition if the dog's worried about Uncle Bob, just, you know, create positive associations with that kind of context. So I did a lot of heavy focus on that, but I realized that for the transition of behaviors to happen, it's better to just focus on the environment. Yes, the handler relationship matters, of course, and what we're doing, but for when it comes to a dog that's going from like a foster home or from a board and train situation to their new environment, you know, behaviors in the environment. So we want to see better transitions of our work that we do, is like actually try to do like transitions to actually doing a lot less of me directing traffic, right? Or telling the dog do X, Y, or Z, or having to always be there to do that. Now, obviously there's circumstances we need to do that, but sometimes let's say it's Uncle Bob coming over. Why do we actually need to be there to tell the dog to station? Why can't the doorbell ringing or the uncle stranger walking home be the cue to go do that?
Right.
That way I don't have to be there, and neither does that adopter or the person that's, you know, done the board, you know,
Sure.
that paid for the board and train. But to an extent. Now, obviously, there's examples. You know, if somebody's doing true protection work, of course,
Right.
they're not gonna go, yeah, let the environment
Just go in the house.
decide, is that guy bad or not? So, but I think that makes a big difference, because then when you start to recognize that it's the environment. Just like if we took that street dog, right?
Yeah.
I could do all kinds of board and train or training as a foster,
Yeah.
but what's going to really transition to the new environment? I'm better suited, and I tell shelter folks this all the time, better suited getting that dog ready for their new environment in any way I can. So is it a dog that hasn't touched grass, right? So let's get the dog out on grass. That way it transitions well to, you know, that's obviously an extreme example,
Right.
but, you know, let's see if that transitions well to the next home for, you know, for the work I've done.
And so would you use environmental cues like a doorbell?
You
Or
can.
like somebody opening the door like
Depends
that?
on the case, yeah, because
Okay.
sometimes doorbells can be like a secondary trigger.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful, you know, how we use those things. But absolutely, if you can easily, that's one of the easy things to
Yeah, yeah.
transition, because it's such a salient cue. It's like it's hard to like sound different, right?
Right. Yeah, of
Not
course.
versus like a vocal cue or somebody walking in with a certain look or something like that. You know, doorbells are very clear and consistent.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you can train it to that level, absolutely, the dog can be like, I hear that. That means I go there.
Yeah.
And that pays off really well for me if I go to that spot and leave Uncle Bob alone at the same time. Now, obviously, you have to build up to that certain level of training. So it depends on the context. Obviously, like in a shelter
Right.
environment, they're not going to get to that level, but they can certainly do things to get that dog ready for their new environment, you know, whether it's learning how to just adapt to different surfaces or exploring certain things, feeling safer in certain situations. We can do that as trainers and work with the dog. That'll transition more than me teaching somebody, okay, sit down, stay, that the person needs to cue those things, right? And it's not to say those things aren't useful. Absolutely need those things as well. But I think to answer the broader question there is, let's try to get the environment to do as much of the work for us. That way we don't have to be there, and it also transitions well.
What other things would you use in the environment to kind of communicate to the dog?
It could be anything. I mean, it could be the equipment, you know, a leash, a particular leash, you know, think about like loose leash walking, for instance. Sometimes that transitions well and sometimes it doesn't. It depends you really have to have the person that's taking the leash over from you, whether it's the adopter or one of your clients, they have to know what to do mechanically so they don't inadvertently make it worse for themselves again, you know, reinforcing leash pulling, for instance. But that leash setup, whether it's a harness or any other type of equipment, can be the environmental cue. Okay, walk nicely on leash when you've got this on. So that's a perfect example of like, okay, you have this particular setup on, sort of like a service dog. That's what you're doing.
Yeah.
When it's off, you're not. And that's the kind of transition that works well, versus let's teach you like how to, you know, do a loose leash walking and the reinforcement or whatever, however you're going to teach it. That of course transitions well too, but that's more work for us that we have to teach that person. We just usually, if you can just get them to do the basics, we're happy. Just don't let the dog pull you.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Or just ask it to do anything.
Yeah, because we have sometimes expectations as trainers. It's like, okay, we're trying to make baby trainers out of this client.
Yeah.
You know, we know it takes time. So whatever I can do to make it easier by using the environment more, so to speak, than, you know.
That's awesome. Yeah. What are potential downfalls when adding punishment to discourage the exhibition of aggression?
So when dogs display aggression, we want to think about why, the reason for their aggressive behavior, because oftentimes we're thinking of symptoms, right? So the symptoms of certain emotions or motivations can be things like barking, lunging, growling, snarling, snapping, and biting, right? Those are, think of it like our runny nose or our headache after drinking too much the night before. Those are the symptoms from the cause, and the cause is usually something underlying. Most aggressive behavior, there's some underlying cause versus that's in a negative balanced emotion, which I'll talk about in a second. But because a lot of problem behaviors, if you think about, are in a positive balanced emotion, things like dog jumping up on grandma. Dog's happy to see grandma, dog's jumping up. It's a behavior problem for some people. They don't want grandma getting knocked over. But the dog doesn't have a negative balanced emotion. They're not worried about grandma in most cases. They're not doing it because they have some underlying need that's not being met, or an emotion that's not being addressed in the right way. So with aggressive behaviors, oftentimes it's fear, frustration, stress, anxiety, can be underlying pain issues, a lack of enrichment. All those things can fuel aggressive behaviors. And so I've got to be careful not to introduce a negative association by adding in a negative stimulus, or what I would call an aversive stimulus to the dogs in that context. So for instance, Uncle Bob coming over and somebody does like an old school, let's hit the dog with a newspaper if this dog's barking at Uncle Bob, potentially could suppress the behavior. But what if that dog's fearful of Uncle Bob? And we start to say, okay, knock it off, don't bark at Uncle Bob. It might say, the dog might be like, okay, I won't bark at Uncle Bob, but I still don't like Uncle Bob. In fact, I really don't like him because every time he comes over now, I'm getting whacked with this newspaper. Yeah. So that's the risk of it. Now, I'm going to be clear, it doesn't happen all the time like that. There's a risk of it. And anytime there's a risk of some type of, I'll call it side effect, like if the dog gets more fearful, then I'm going to be really careful. We have to weigh the cost and benefit of using something, that's going to suppress a behavior or correct or punish, depending on which word you choose. But that's why I'm really careful, because if you look at most aggressive behaviors, there is that negative valence emotion or some negative aspect to it, in the sense of it could be pain. We certainly don't want to cause any more discomfort to a dog that's just responding aggressively because they're in pain, for instance. So those are the kind of cases that we have to be careful about.
Yeah.
Right?
I know, like for me, even like a lot of the initial education that I had with regards to like aggression training was like all suppression. Yeah. And then what I found in my own personal experience, and then also like reading it, is that a lot of times when you suppress it, you're really just like, it's like one of those kids' toys where, like, if you squeeze one side and it gets larger on the other side, you know what I mean?
I know exactly
and so like, you can suppress it here, but it doesn't really do much except potentially move it someplace down the line where it shows up either differently or like worse. Yeah. And so a lot of times, like we've tried to move away from like suppressing certain behaviors where we can, and like you said, give dogs like an alternative behavior or something like that.
I think it's, again, thinking about the root cause of the behavior is so important, because once you address that, just like in the street dogs we were talking about, they don't have any of those issues because we're not putting them in context or situations where they have to display aggression. Or they've learned it very subtly how to communicate that, so they don't have to go to the big stuff. They just give the other dog a look and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, because they're so good at the communication, the nuances of it. Again, that's because all of their needs have been met. All of their, they're not being exposed to contexts or situations that causes fear or negative balanced emotions. And we have to think more about that too when it comes to problem behaviors. We got to look at the core, the root of the problem, rather than all the symptoms we're seeing. Because as trainers, that's how our mindset goes. We're looking at behaviors so much, teaching things, teaching sits, teaching downs, retrieves, recalls, biting, even. Like, this is all stuff we teach, but if we don't think about what's causing it in the first place, we're going to miss the whole picture.
Yeah. So that just brought up another question for me. It's kind of a sidebar, but like, what do you think are the qualities that exemplify like a good trainer?
Good question. I wonder if I should answer from a perspective of a trainer that works with aggression cases or a trainer in general.
Whichever, or both.
Because it depends what you're doing. I should clarify that. I guess it depends what line of work you're getting into with training. Because some people get into training because they love dogs and they don't like people. And I get it. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think it depends like if you're training, for instance, service dogs, you're going to be mostly working with the dogs. You'll do some transitioning to people. If you're doing board and train, you're working with the dogs a lot, but you're still working with the people. Shelter staff, working even less with people. Versus aggression cases, you're mostly working with people and less with the dog. So I think a good attribute a good trainer can have is good people skills and consulting skills and empathy for the clients that they're working with aggression cases. If you're doing other stuff, you don't need it as much, but it's still an important skill in life. Right? I mean, just be able to communicate and talk to people in a way that's kind and that helps them feel understood, because there's a lot of emotions involved with the people, let's face it.
Yeah.
So that's definitely one side, is just being good with people, and just good mechanics, good mechanical skills, the typical, good to have good timing and rate of reinforcement, all that stuff, is developed over time. Like you and I were talking about just the work you do as a decoy and how much time it takes to develop the little nuances in your movements and what to expect as the dog's coming at you. That just, it's sort of like the art of training. You can write about it, you can read about it, you can watch it, but until you do it, you're not gonna get good at it. So something that's I think mechanical skills and what we do with our own movements and how we use our voice and all those things start to add up to the difference between a good trainer and a great trainer is the mechanics of it.
Who are some of your favorites?
So my favorite trainers?
Yeah, favorite
It
trainers.
depends which line again. So if we're talking sport dogs, I always shout out Denise Fenzi. She's a good friend of mine, and she's a top of her field competitor for forever. So, it's a good question. If I'm looking at, it depends which, it really depends.
Yeah,
which,
it's like asking you what your favorite album is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which genre we're
Depends
talking
on
about.
the
We're talking
mood,
about
right?
jazz, classical, what we're talking about here. So, and if you're talking about multi-species, like Ken Ramirez, whose conference I'm at this weekend, the guy's trained hundreds of different species.
Yeah.
He's trained butterflies to do a different migration pattern. I mean, that's the whole nother level of like really just understanding animal behavior. So I've had so many influences on my career that have just really helped to shape what I do. So it's really not one particular.
Is there anyone in particular maybe that has had the greatest impact on you as far as like your work into aggression?
Ooh, I should give a shout out to my one of my first mentors, Barbara Brill, the late Barbara Brill. She ran this Yahoo group. I don't know if you remember those back in the day.
I do.
The little discussion groups, but she was a really great behavior consultant, but understood aggression like just at such a deep level. So that had a tremendous influence on how I think about, because I was, one of my first mentors was a military dog trainer, and so very heavy-handed kind of. That's what was my first look at working with training, but also aggression issues. And so that was my mindset at the time. And she was really good at kind of helping me learn about other aspects of aggression too. So, and Patricia McConnell is another really great influence in her writings. So a lot. It's a small world, but a great world. This dog training space we live in, because there's so much you can learn, and I find that just like we're sitting down and talking, once you sit down, most of the people that are out there, all these big names,
little pieces.
Just you get little pieces, but you just also you can learn so much, from one-on-one conversations, and I've been fortunate enough to do a lot of that over the years, at different conferences, and just like you and I are meeting now. I think it's important to talk to anybody who wants to talk. I want to talk.
Like I want to talk.
I'm learning,
that's awesome.
You learn from everybody all the time.
That's awesome. Can you potentially share a time where your more go-to methods weren't effective and you had to adopt to a different approach?
Yeah, definitely. I'm actually talking about that this weekend at the conference. Yeah, I'm talking about some different strategies for the aggression cases, and there's a lot of different protocols out there, but all of them can be explainable through, it depends which science you're talking to as well, but behavior analysis or ethology or neuroscience, like every single protocol or fancy strategy that's ever existed, there's not much difference really in what's going on. There's subtleties, but, people like to put like their stamp on it, which is fine. I have nothing wrong with that, because it actually helps to educate trainers as well when they learn about a certain technique or acronym or something like that. So, I had one dog that typically my go-to is, let me build trust with a dog. And one of the fastest ways you can often do that is food or what you're doing with your body language or, so how you approach the dog and how you talk to the dog, all of your interactions, just like a conversation between people. I don't need to give you food or money to
I mean, you could,
but it's part of the process, right? You just build a relationship. So sometimes that works. Well, actually, a lot of the times it works just fine. Most dogs are going to be like, they either take food or it's going to be a little bit until they start taking food, but most of them, like, they want some food, toys, play, social interaction. You know, there's a lot of different things you can use to start building trust with that dog. There's one case I showed all the time, is this German Shepherd that the client had worked with 6 other trainers at the time. So, and usually that's usually a big red flag. You're like,
Yeah.
they're just looking for a next quick fix, or they're just trying to do something so they don't have to do the work. But this poor guy, huge, this huge house, smart guy, like 5,000 square foot house, like massive house. Obviously, was successful in what he did. Terrible consumer. Picture the person that like goes and buys like socks and just gets the wrong size every time. That's this guy. So. But with this poor guy, you know, you got to empathize with him. I'm like, he tried. And
Yeah,
he spent
that's
a ton of
I was
money.
gonna say that's a lot.
He spent a ton of money and time.
And I
on
would
this
think
dog.
that's kind of stressful for the dog because
Oh.
it's 5 different system of
Yeah.
communication and
Yeah. So this was one case where I knew I had to, because none of the other trainers could actually get close to this dog. Nobody could touch this dog. He was just, you know, would show aggression even if you're, you know, 50 feet away, 50 yards away. He would just, nobody could even get close to this dog. Some people try and treat, some people trying other methods, and nothing was working for this dog. So I knew I had to get my hands on this dog, to just handle the leash in order that way, so the client could say, hey, something's working here,
Right,
because he actually said those magic words, you know, you're my last hope. So I thought,
No pressure.
okay, I've got to do something where
Yeah.
I'm not just tossing treats, or I'm not, you know, trying to, you know, force this dog into a situation. So, so I tried the treats at first, just because sometimes people will say, oh, he doesn't like treats, and you're like, want to make a bet? Well, I'll show you. Let me pull out my real goodies. You know, you always
Right.
we travel with a lot of good stuff with us, but this dog, tried everything, tried all my tricks, tried, you know, and I got a history of what was tried with him before I knew what wasn't going to work. So I did something called the CAT procedure, which is short for constructional aggression treatment, where you use distance to reinforce desirable behavior. So what you do is, as the dog's like barking or lunging at you, and this is the original version of CAT. There's a newer version that's not as stressful, where it's just the dog is noticing you from a distance. So you wait for some desirable alternative behavior. So instead of trying to kill the person, right? So look at the ground, look at the sky, sniff the grass, whatever. It doesn't matter. You wait for that. You wait for the dog to give you that. And as soon as the dog gives you that, because the dog wants distance. Remember, the function of aggression is they want you to go away if they're worried about you. And so I did that. I said, give me something else. And I stood there and waited. The dog was back tied, you know, long line. To something really sturdy. And so the dog's barking, lunging at me, and then I just waited for him to give me something else, and I marked that behavior. Now, he had some marker training in a little bit, but as soon as he did that, it backed away. As soon as he stopped. So he just looked at the ground for a second, I said, good, and backed away. And then what you do is you approach again, the dog's going to start barking and lunging at you, and then you wait for something else. But each time you're able to get a little bit closer. And over the course of about 20 minutes it took. So no food, no toys, nothing. That was actually much faster than it typically takes.
Yeah.
I think because he was a little overweight. I think there was a little bit like, I'm getting tired here. Yeah, because he needed, like, he hadn't gone to exercise in a while. They couldn't take him for walks. He couldn't leave the house. Like, it was bad. Big house, too. 5,000 square foot. He was stuck in the basement anytime somebody tried to come over. But even then, they could be on the top floor, 4-floor house. He'd be on the top floor. He'd still be barking and getting stressed out in the basement.
Was he okay with the guardians?
Yeah, he was great with the people. Like he had his inner circle of you know, shepherds can be sometimes 4 or 5 inner circle that was his family, but that was it. So eventually I had the clients hook up a second leash to the dog with the back tie, and we just start walking. And that was this dog's thing. This dog liked the actual walks because he hadn't been walked in a while. And I said, unhook the back tie, and we just went for a walk in the neighborhood. And that's how I built a relationship with the dog. So
that's awesome.
So it's not just going in and grabbing a dog that's already barking, lunging at you, and just, you know, stringing them up or doing something that's going to suppress it for the moment. I find that builds more trust because the dog now knows I can make you still go away if I want to, but I know how to do it in other ways. I can look at the ground. So you respect that, and then as soon as you get close enough, a lot of dogs, they get what's called a switchover effect. They get curious enough. They're like, this guy really gets it. Like, check it out. Like, it's interesting how you see the demeanor change, curiosity. So it's a perfect example. Like sometimes you switch gears from what I typically do is, you know, classical conditioning, classical counter conditioning, desensitization, or reinforcing alternative behaviors. That's going to work for a lot of the cases, but sometimes it doesn't. So sometimes you got to switch gears to something. It's technically a negative reinforcement procedure where the dog's, you know, you're removing the aversive, which is you, to reinforce desirable behavior, which is looking at the ground and not trying to kill me. So yeah, and so sometimes you got to switch, you got to switch gears. But I will say for anybody listening in too is that you don't want to practice.
Yeah.
If somebody does the cat procedure, go watch it so like the
Yeah, you know what
nuances,
you're doing.
because it can be really stressful, not only
Yeah.
for you but also the dog. So it's a procedure I don't
And then
use
you also
often.
have to know when to kind of end it, because you may make some progress and you may not
Exactly.
get all the way to the point where you're
Exactly.
walking the dog in 20 minutes.
Exactly.
So like, if you
Yeah.
get some progress, maybe accept that as a
Yeah.
win and,
Yeah, a
come back
cat
another
procedure you
day.
typically do so it can take a couple hours with some
Okay.
dogs. Typically, you do that one particular procedure all the way
All the
through
way through.
because
Okay.
um, I guess the theory behind it is you don't want to add too many, because it's a stressful event for the dog. So you don't
Sure.
want to add too many. Like if you don't get to your goal of this dog's interested in trusting me, you could go back the next time, be like, that sucked the last time, right?
Yeah.
You were able to get closer, but I'm still not good with you. So you kind of want to build that relationship if you can in
Okay.
that first session. Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
We do something similar, like almost the exact opposite in like sport training, to try to get
Mhm.
dogs to be aggressive, right? And the
Yeah,
bite work.
exactly.
Like we wait for
Exactly.
them to exhibit the aggression,
Yeah.
and that kind of creates the movement or the action from the decoy,
Yeah.
which then kind of throws the dog into prey. So it's very
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. And when you
Yeah.
think about it, we were talking about the balance of emotions.
Mhm.
Dogs you're working with, they're happy about
Yeah.
doing it. They're like, I
Yeah.
want to get to that thing.
Yeah.
So the motivation or the function is to actually to decrease distance.
Yeah.
So even though we could label it aggressive behavior,
Mm.
we want to look at the motivation, the underlying function of that. So that's why also, that there's less risk of any kind of negative association if you suppress any of those behaviors, because there's no negative balance emotion we're worried about affecting with those dogs, right?
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, I love biting sleeves. I
Yeah,
love
let's
biting
do it.
sleeves.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's the difference again with the typical client cases we're going to work with. Most of the dogs aren't
Yeah.
happy about it.
No.
They're having a difficult time. So unless somebody again just happens to get a good Malinois,
Yeah.
if they don't know what they're getting
Or
into.
I should say Malinois gets a good owner,
Yeah.
like that's probably more accurate. Let's see. In your experience, what role does breed and genetics play in the
Yeah.
development of aggression in dogs?
I think it plays a lot of role when we're talking about aggressive behaviors.
Yeah.
And well, here's the thing: is that all dogs have the potential to show aggressive behaviors, just like humans.
Yep.
If they didn't, they wouldn't survive long, right? Because aggression is usually meant to keep yourself safe or to protect your resources.
Yeah.
Two things you really need to survive. So, all dogs, Cavalier King, Charles Spaniel can bite you if you push it far enough. So, but we've selected for certain parts of that, or really the predatory motor sequence, and we've exaggerated it in some dogs, and we've asked some dogs not to do much of that part of the predatory motor sequence. So when you look at all of the behaviors of all breeds, all of them have some part of that predatory motor sequence. And so genetically, we've selected for, let's use pit bulls, for instance, and dogs the bite style is to bite and hold. That's what we've selected for. Let's do that part of the predatory motor sequence, that bite and hold aspect of it. Versus a border collie, we've asked them not to bite and hold. It's just a quick front teeth type of behavior they're doing as part of that sequence. Some dogs we've asked them really just to eye the thing, so pointers, right? We've asked them not to bite and hold and shake and all that stuff. So when you look at it from a genetic standpoint, look at the breeds we've selected for certain tasks and certain behaviors that are part of that predatory motor sequence in the work that they do. And so genetics is really important to pay attention to. Now, we also select for other traits like tenacity or dogs that are going to guard certain properties, for instance, like livestock guardian dogs. You don't have to teach them much most of the time. Just, they're going to bark at things coming over to the house. They're going to bark at people at the fence line. It comes out almost naturally in most cases. So that's good genetics. That's just genetics. So if we don't recognize that, and a client calls a new trainer and they're like, I want my livestock guardian dog to stop barking at the fence.
Right.
I want my golden retriever to stop grabbing stuff in the house and bringing it to the front door when people come over. It's unrealistic. So that's why genetics and breed should be taken into consideration in our cases. However, as we were talking before too, not all dogs are going to do what we ask, what we suspect they would do as a certain breed. In fact, sometimes it's really difficult to actually get that, though it should always be a consideration in the work and the dog that we're working with. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good point. Definitely think it should be a consideration, and but also not, not the end all be all. I have seen people or seen trainers, say that certain things weren't possible based off the dog's breed, and a lot of times I'm like, well, you didn't even get in there and try and do the work. Like,
Yeah.
maybe you can, make some changes, because at the end of the day, it's still behavioral training. Like, you're still like teaching behavior. It may not, you may not be able to change it, but like, sometimes it's worth trying. But definitely taking it into consideration, I think is a big. Can you discuss any ethical dilemmas or considerations you've encountered for yourself when dealing with aggressive behaviors in dogs?
Yeah. Because it's interesting that because dog training is not regulated, there's no
Right.
license, there's no requirements, and there's some cases that it's, I mean, you have to have a license to cut somebody's hair. Think about that for a second.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's cases people can walk into, and there could be like imminent threat of death to
Yeah.
somebody in the family,
Yeah.
and it's scary to walk into that. So, from an ethics standpoint, we have to consider because we get into to help the dogs. A lot of us were like, yeah, we want to help dogs. We can help with training and behavior problems. We can help the families, but we don't often consider, the human part of the equation and also who's living with that human. So one of the ethical dilemmas we can face is if it's dog to child directed aggression, and then you have a client that's, paying your bills, they'll come over and help train, but you're worried about the threat to that child because the parent's not taking it seriously. They don't
Right.
see the potential harm because maybe something hasn't happened yet,
Right.
or something has happened and they're just sugarcoating it and glossing over it. I can think of a good example. As another trainer contacted me for a case. They had gotten the dogs, but there was a dog as a therapy dog for that child who had suffered some trauma prior to them getting the dog, but they had gotten the dog as like a comfort dog. Like, let's get the child, and the therapist is like, that's great, there, get a good family companion. There's a lot of benefits to that. But the dog was showing aggression towards the child and ended up biting the child. And the parents' goal was like, we got to keep this dog. We got this dog as a therapy dog. And I'm like, it's doing exactly the opposite of what you got the dog for in the first place.
Yeah.
So you sometimes have to have these sensitive conversations because you also can't be like, that's just, what are you doing? Because you have to empathize. What they're
back to
going
the empathy. Yeah.
You have to empathize that they may not just don't see it right now. They're just kind of stuck on like, we spent this money, we got this dog, and they end up, biting their child. So you have to explain to them the problem, in a empathetic way and compassionate way. But those are the ethical challenges we can face sometimes because, what if you're like, I need the business, or I want to keep working with this dog, or I love dogs, I can help this dog, and we're not considering the child and what the impacts are for them. So cases like that, we have to think when there's biting involved, especially to family members, there's a lot of challenges that we have to navigate, and so that's where people side, right?
I have a dog in right now, and the first day that the owner came to drop him off, I walked him through like how I wanted him to manage the leash and all that stuff, and of course that's not what he did. So the dog comes charging at me, bites my arm, but not for real. Like, he's still kind of young, and I'm like, hey, like, we need to have a real conversation about this dog. And then he mentioned something about the dog. He's not sure about the dog, like with his son. He was like, do you think he'll be okay? And I was like, if you're asking me, then you already know it's probably not okay.
Yeah.
Right? Like something has happened that has made you question whether or not you feel like this dog is safe for your kid, right? And like, you really need to consider that if that's the case. I was like, I haven't gotten in with him. Like, I don't know how bad he is, but like, that's something you should.
Yeah.
If you're already asking me, then you're already thinking about it. Like,
and we have to remember as trainers that could be our sole job sometimes. We're not actually even going to do any training with the dog. We're there just consult and give them a realistic picture of what they've got.
Yeah.
And that might be it. That might be your work. But that's still success because you're giving that person information that they need to make objective decisions rather than emotional or subjective decisions. They're able to go in and be like, oh, now with David, and he talked about this, this, and this, and now it makes sense to me. So now I can know how to move forward. For me, that's success. Like,
Yeah.
even if it's a negative outcome for the dog, it's still helping the family and keeping everybody safe too.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
sometimes those difficult conversations need to be had. Yeah.
Yeah, I know one of the things that we always stress to like people in general is that like it's not always a good fit. Like the dog's not always
Yeah.
a good fit for
Yeah.
your family, and that's okay. You know, of course we don't want to just abandon dogs because we're like, oh, like he does this terrible thing that I don't like, but we should, you know, put all the effort in to try to make it work. But at the end of the day, if it just doesn't work, that's okay. You know, and I think sometimes people have to be all right with saying that the dog is not a good fit for your family, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
one of the questions I had here was, how do you navigate cases when the aggression in dogs is directed at children? Or let's say, maybe not even children, but like other vulnerable
The cats
populations.
or
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Extra careful. So that's,
Okay.
I consider number one, the risk and the safety aspect. So how risky is it? Risk for me is assessed through how well they can manage things, the size of the dog's bite history, all those typical factors we look at in terms of what do I think could happen to this child. And I'm going to assume it's actually going to happen because management often fails. So that's the first thing I look at. Like if the dog's like killed a cat in the past, it's probably not going to live in a home with a cat unless it's some really odd circumstance. Like I can think of one case where a client had a dog that killed another dog, and you're like, whoa, that's. But then she explained the history. This dog perfectly great with all other dogs, goes to daycare, great at a dog park, social with other dogs in the home. And it just happened because she was walking this dog every single day, like by a certain house in this small little, like it was like a Chihuahua mix. The owner didn't really have much, it was a terrible owner. Like let the dog would just come out and charge this large dog. And it would happen quite often, even though she would like, she had limited options of where she could walk this dog. It was like, this is the only way to get by. So this small dog, one day, the large dog was just like, you know what? I had enough of you. Well, quick, white, cold, so that's like a perfect example. Like it's really not that risky
Right.
because it was not that dog's fault. But with children in the home, or any other vulnerable animal, it's going to be. I'm looking at how well it can be managed and what the potential is for if there's another incident. So if I have like the dog, it's like a 5-year-old dog and it's been growling at the kids for like messing with the food ball or hugging it and things like that, and there's been no bite history, or maybe it's just been an air snap or very minimal damage. It's a much different kind of case because there's history there. The dog's showing good bite inhibition, and it's pretty explanatory why the dog's getting mad at the kids. So if we can control that and manage that, that's a much more doable case.
Right.
So yeah, you always want to look at. I'm really careful because the thing with kids and of course other animals is that as an adult, like you were just telling me about that incident with one of your clients, like it's not gonna traumatize you. But with kids, they're very vulnerable to development. Of how we all know somebody that's afraid of dogs because of an incident that they had. So I'm extra sensitive to that. I don't want a kid on my watch getting scarred emotionally because of I was not taking into account that risk factor. So yeah, it's definitely I have a much more how I say tight criteria for if I'm going to take a child directed aggression case. And in some cases, it could be such an imminent risk to the child, you actually have to consider child endangerment, and what the laws are. So if any trainers are listening in, depending on the laws of the state and the jurisdiction, you might actually mandatorily have to report that, or else you could get in trouble if you don't say something. So that's far and few between. It's super rare to see that happen, but it can happen. So
something to consider for sure.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. This one is important to me. Because I think as trainers we spend a lot of time focusing on the dog, and we spend a lot of time focusing on dog behavior and making a lot of changes in the dog, but I don't feel like we spend enough time focusing on the people who have to take care of these dogs and have to live with these dogs. So what do you think is what do you think are some of the best ways to educate and empower the average pet owner who is struggling with their dog's aggression?
Great question. I think the first thing to do with a client is figure out where they're at, because it can be surprising sometimes. You go in and the dog's like sent grandma to the hospital like the day before,
Yeah.
and it's not affecting them really emotionally much. And then you have other cases, the dog like happened to growl at somebody because they were riding the dog around the house like a pony or something like that, and then they're like, oh my gosh, you can't have an aggressive dog, it's really got to get rid of this dog. So first, as I sit with a client, one of the things I do is just like you and I are talking, we just talk, and I get a feel for where that client's at, and I try to build some trust and rapport so that client feels safe telling me what I need to hear for truthful information. Because if I don't have that relationship, a lot of people aren't going to open up with truly how they feel. But after, about 30, 45 minutes into the consult with them, I'm going to ask, how are you feeling about all this? Typically after we go through what I call a prognosis, it's like looking at different factors. How manageable is it? How much time can they spend on this? What's the dog's bite risk? All these factors I look at. And then after I go through them, so they're thinking more objectively about their case, I'll ask them, so how do you feel about all this?
Right.
And they're going to give you that answer that you're looking for. That's going to help you with the question you ask, is like, how can we support the people more, or do we need to? And if I feel like they need more support because I'm like, I'm just super stressed, I'm just feeling down, I don't know if I don't have the relationship with my dog, and they're giving you these responses, is it appropriate for me then to be like, let's talk about what we can do to change that? And I'll ask them that. It's like, is it okay? Is that, do you want to continue with this? Is there something I can do to help that? And if I get that feeling, then I'll be like, okay, so what do you like to do with your dog? What do you want to go back to? What did you get the dog for in the first place? What have been your goals with your dog? That starts to recharge like that emotional bank account, right? It starts to put little deposits in there, so that way they're starting to feel a little bit better about their dog. And then I'll try to work on one of those skills, be like, okay, so you do want to go to the park with your dog, or you want to be able to just sit and read, and let's maybe try to make that happen, but we're going to do it in a way that's your dog's going to be successful, so that you're successful and you're feeling better. So that's where our job as trainers come in. It's like, what are we going to do to teach this dog the skill, as well as which environment are we going to pick? And sometimes it's all about just picking the right environment first so they can see success without doing any training.
Yeah.
Sometimes let's just go do X, Y, or Z. If we can see you having a good time with your dog, that starts to repair that relationship. And that's so important to look for, because we can go in there with fancy plans.
Yeah.
I can totally fix this. If they're not ready to go,
Yeah.
forget it.
Yeah. How important do you think relationship is versus behavioral manipulation, I guess?
That's a really good question. What's interesting to me is that over the years, the last decade or so, with the evolution of how we look at behavior, just through the dog training industry, a lot of, behavior analysis and behaviorism, and looking at Skinner and different ways of looking at behavior, I think removed some of that equation of the relationship, our bonds, what we share with dogs and how we communicate. It was sort of took a backseat to behaviorism, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think it's important to also understand how behavior works, but also we forgot about, the dogs look up to us, looking at us all the time. They're studying our every move. Those nuances really matter, and the relationship really matters, because when you look at what people can do to their dogs without really trying, because of how they're behaving themselves, their emotions, their daily routines, their mannerisms, their inconsistencies or consistencies with things like punishment or reinforcement, all impact that relationship, which ultimately impact the behavior we're trying to work on. And I think we underestimate just how much dogs are recognizing those changes in the relationship, or lack of sometimes. Not only through their observations, but we haven't even tapped into just how much they're able to smell changes in our pheromones, our hormones, everything.
Yeah, that's true.
And how much is that impacting the dogs? We don't know. We're just scratching the surface of that, literally and figuratively. But it's just, I think it's such a deep thing we need to look at more, because I think it really matters. Because the more you do this work, the more you see the relationships with people and their dogs, it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see the nuances of it, you know. But it's hard to put into objective words sometimes because you know, how do you describe
Yeah.
it? You know,
Yeah.
how do you describe love? You know,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. It's the
unique.
the stuff that becomes a lot harder to systematize, and
Yeah,
you know, there's so many variables between the dog's personality,
yeah,
the person's personality.
yeah,
It's hard to kind of tell
yeah,
people, you know,
yeah,
how to regulate that part, how to build a good relationship. But like, if you were to say, like, there are some main tenets that would equate a good relationship with your dog,
yeah.
what would those be? Yeah.
Consistency and routine are
Yeah.
two of the big ones. I think dogs thrive on routine, as we know. They like to see things, you know, it reduces the anxiety and stress if they can have predictable outcomes in their day. So just a person that can be consistent, and not only consistent in terms of, you know, like things like when do we go for a walk, when do we eat, but
Yeah.
what that person does with the dog. Because if somebody comes home, they're frustrated from a bad day at work and they take it out on their dog, and then the next day they come home from the bar and they're all happy, and you know, the dog doesn't know what's happened the
Right.
rest of the day, and we can't communicate to them, you know, my boss was an ass today. They like, think about that. We're the highlight of their day. We're coming home after, you know, a lot of people come home after 8 hours, 9 hours gone from the house, and we're the first thing the dog sees. And if it shows up different every day,
Yeah.
that's gonna really, you know, think about it.
Yeah.
It's like people.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I think consistency, routine are the best things for that relationship, on top of course, all the other interactions and daily things we do with our dogs. But when we provide that, you see a lot of dogs, you know, you can see that anxiety melt away, and the stress and the worry about what's going to happen. So,
Have you ever been badly bitten?
yeah, well, it depends what you do to term bad. Nothing sent to the hospital kind
Okay, I
of
was
stuff.
gonna say stitches, or you know.
I did have a German Shepherd.
Okay.
Of course. I love German Shepherds. I'll say that. I do. I love, because
He means Chihuahua. It was a Chihuahua.
I love Shepherds because, you know, I've worked with so many of them.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
it's a popular breed as well, but
Yeah.
I do happen to see a lot of German Shepherds. And yeah, this one, usually German Shepherds are the easiest dog to read. Well,
Yeah.
because, you know, when you work with a lot of them, you start to see the same things, but they're very expressive.
Yeah.
They wear
Yes,
all
they
their
are.
emotions on their
Yes,
sleeve. They're
yes,
not like
that's-
Rotties.
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
like-
they're a little hard,
yeah.
a little more stoic. You know, Shepherds are really expressive, so
Yeah.
like Malinois, but they can usually tell what they're.
Yeah.
They could do this one.
Yeah.
This one was like, did not read the German Shepherd handbook, and I thought, you know, because I'd worked with so many of them, I'm like, okay, this dog's ready to come up and say hello. And I had let down some of my usual safeties. Usually I'm doing protective contact, where it's like a muzzle or something to keep myself safe. This one, for whatever reason, I just was like, yeah, you know, let him come up, because he wasn't barking. He was just like inquisitive. And it was just like not like a
Neutral
not
body.
yeah, not like
yeah.
a stiff, frozen, kind of hard staring, you know, nothing, none of the red flags, and no stress signals, no subtle things like tongue flakes, or even,
Oh.
you know, even the respiration rate. Like you start to notice these little things. This dog was just like, just, yeah, come up, say hello. He poker face came up to me. I did the leg sniff, and then
Did boom. Yeah.
and so yeah, bite and hold, and I, you know, took a few seconds to get him released. So that was probably the worst one I've ever had. But that was like what I would classify like a level 3.
Yeah.
I was wearing thick jeans at the time, but so puncture wounds, but nothing too deep. But that's the worst of it. You know, I've been bitten 3 times in my life, and one was breaking up a dog fight between foster dogs, and then another was like a little min pin that escaped out of it. And it wasn't the client one I was working with. So that was the 3 bites. I've had close calls, of course.
Would you learn from the bite from the shepherd?
Just keep safety in mind, like protect. It's interesting. You ever hear the word protected contact? It's interesting. I was just talking to some of my colleagues today, and like the proper terminology would protective contact.
Yeah.
Because when you think about it, protected would mean the contact. It's protected.
Yeah.
But we use it all the time. We always just use that phrase. It's just like what we've used for years. And,
Yeah.
and not only dog training, but in the zoo world, it's actually protective contact, which makes so sense. But yeah, just to remember, like, you know, keep doing what I preach all the time: safety. So layers of protection. you know, whether you know the dog or not, till you get a good feel, and then
Yeah.
you know, you use your own instincts and judgment in terms of if you want to start dropping those layers of safety as you work with the dog and the dog trusts you. I rushed it, and that's usually what happens. It's when we get bitten as trainers, it's when we make a mistake, and it's usually we're not reading the dog as well as we think we are, or we've dropped layers of safety that should have been there. But if you have those two things in place, most of the time you can be completely fine.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. What's next for you? Like now you've done all these things, you're traveling everywhere.
Yeah.
Like what's the next iteration?
I think I love the educating the masses kind of part of it. You know, um, I enjoy most, you know, going somewhere and somebody's been influenced by something I said, or maybe a webinar I did, or a course you know, they took from me, and how much it's playing a role in their lives and the lives of dogs that they're helping in that corner of the world. It's just that for me, that's so reinforcing. So I want to continue in that effort. And, you know, we were just talking kind of off camera about, you know, I'd like to just show how dog behavior and human culture is in other parts of the world, you know, because there's so much to learn. And when we get stuck in our bubbles, whether it's online bubbles, you know, the community we surround ourselves with, or the places we live, it doesn't allow us to see what else is out there. And there's just so much out there that that we can learn from each other, and we can learn from other cultures, and we can start to appreciate other cultures, which not only brings down walls in the dog training space, it brings down walls everywhere.
In general,
And when we think about it, dogs are all over the planet, every pocket of the world, and they can teach us so much, and they can bring our cultures together, and how we, you know, communicate and talk to each other, and can be kind to each other, because we have dogs, you know, and dogs are always bring up good conversation.
like
right?
music,
Everybody talks about it. Like, you know, as you go into a store and then you find out your dog training, here come the dog questions, right? It just brings
100%.
people together. It's a common topic like food or the weather. But dogs, of course, are, you know, these sentient beings that bring us joy and happiness. So it's just it's a good way to bring people together, I think. So that's my goal next. I think it's just, you know, do some maybe TV show, YouTube channel. Who knows how it'll turn out? You know, continuing in the education.
So is there anything you want to plug by chance?
Just my site, you know, like aggressivedog.com is where people can find me, and all of the stuff I offer. There's a lot of free stuff on there, articles and videos, and there's from some free webinars as well people can take. So I like to be able to share education in that aspect, but all the other stuff too, like the Aggression in Dogs conference coming up later this year is on there, and the podcast. And so, yeah, it's an easy place to
find everything. All right, perfect, man. Hey, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For coming out. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks for coming out to the barn and Scappies, you know.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Awesome. All right.
I can't thank Michael enough for coming by. If he's in your town, make sure you feed him. We can do the best work for dogs when we make good connections with people.